Hello, beloved Earthbound fam. This vloggity is going to get deep into some ancient history that seems to have fallen through the cracks of time. If you've watched my last vloggities, you know that we are now officially in the age of Aquarius. But what I didn't mention is that humanity has been here before. So today I want to discuss the cyclical patterns of the previous ages of Aquarius and how they pertain to this recycled version of the journey we've just embarked on. Before I get into this vloggity, after of which I'm going to be reading to you because I wrote it because it's very long, very deep. It's interesting, an interesting coinkydink or synchronicity, as I like to think of them, that the message that came up on my little book of virtues says what it says, as well as my little tea tag that I pulled today. So I just wanted to share these with you before I get into this. Today's little book of virtue message is from David O. McKay. Have no clue who that is. But anyway, it reads, "Find a purpose in life so big it will challenge every capacity to be at your best." Let's turn around so you can see it. And then the T tag that I pulled today says, "Give thanks for unknown blessings that are already on the way." Hopefully that is something you can see. These are so apropos for this vloggity that I just had to share them with you. So anyway, let me preface this particular vloggity with this. On August 3rd, Chiron, a couple of days ago, Chiron, who is known as the wounded healer and the cosmic energetic representative of the inner child, went retrograde in the void degree between the house of Taurus and the house of Aries. The house of Taurus is the infant house of earth, and the house of Aries is the infant house of fire. This will be important to keep in mind as I take you on this deep dive journey into becoming aware of the ancients, my friends. And yes, this vloggity will get deep and provoking thoughts, and I don't really apologize for that. In the end, I hope that it will provide a safety net for those thoughts and learning about this particular ancient history. Forewarning, this vloggity might hit some triggery feels in ya. And if that arises, feel free to drop this vloggity like it's hot. But alternatively, possibly consider asking yourself why this is pulling on your triggery spots. Because when we face our triggers, we send the universe and our subconscious a message that we are ready to heal these things that sit cryptically in our psyches. And that is exactly what Chiron's energetics as the wounded healer are all about. So put on your mental diving gear, my friends, and let's jump right in, shall we? The stories that I'm going to tell you today are some of the most incredible ancient pieces of history or mythology, if that's how you choose to perceive it, that have played a huge part in molding the world as we know it today. In this vloggity, I'll present you with some pieces of this history, connecting Chiron's history to the story of Prometheus, as well as the history of Dark Moon Lilith and Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, and how history repeats itself. That being said, please reel this information in or release it freely. These are just parallels that I am being led to see deep within the mysteries of this thing called life. So if these points of view I'm presenting don't resonate with yours, please feel free to leave them behind. In Greek mythology, Chiron was conceived from a forceful interlude between the Titan Kronos, who is Saturn in Roman mythology, and Philyra, a captivatingly beautiful sea nymph. Philyra was not keen on Kronos' chasing of her and denied his advancements adamantly. When Kronos became even more aggressive in pursuing Philyra, she tried to hide from him by turning herself into a horse. But Kronos, who was the king of the gods, knew her tactics to try to elude him. So he turned himself into a horse as well and had his way with her while they were in those forms. Well, Philyra became pregnant, but she was not in the least bit happy about it due to the traumatic circumstances she was forced to suffer through from Kronos. Though she knew the baby was innocent, her resentment for him grew as he grew in her belly, and so did the roughness of her pregnancy due to her inability to release the anguish, which is completely understandable, right? I mean, for sure, understandable. But this is also a perfect example of how mental and emotional anguish can leak into the physical body and create even more pain in our human existence, right? Granted, Philyra was not human. She was a sea nymph, but, on a outside relative scale. Anyway, moving on. By the time Chiron was born, Philyra didn't even want to look at him. But when she did, she became even more horrified to see that her son had been born a centaur, or a half-man, half-horse hybrid, rather than a full human form. She was mortified to see this crossbred beast, and instead of trying to find love in her heart for mothering him, she decided to leave him on a mountainside to die. But Apollo, the god of light, just happened to stroll by and heard a baby crying. He found the centaur Bambino and rescued him, taking him back to Mount Pelion in Olympus. And Apollo and his sister Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and the moonlight, raised the baby as their own. The centaur was named Chiron, and Apollo and Artemis taught Chiron everything they knew about medicine, the sciences of astrology, physiology, biology, herbology, and trained him in the skills of hunting, gathering, and prophecy according to the cycles. Apollo also taught Chiron how to play music, as well as how to use music as a tool to heal others. Apollo schooled Chiron in many genres of art, and Artemis schooled him in the art of war. Chiron became one of the most learned of the Greek gods and was gifted by the gods to become not only a healer, but a teacher of the healing arts, as well as the go-to guru of the art of hunting and the art of war. He became a mentor to many, many students and was highly respected throughout all of Olympus by all gods and demigods alike. The other centaur tribes did not like that Chiron had become so chummy and accepted by the Olympians. And when Heracles, known as Hercules in Roman myth, who was actually one of Chiron's most prized students, was on one of his quests, Heracles opened a sacred bottle of wine that belonged to the skidded centaur tribes. Because of this defiling of the sacred sacrament of centaurian wine, the centaurs waged immediate war on Heracles. Chiron and numerous other gods came to the aid of Heracles in this battle, but the centaurs were a much stronger tribe than anticipated. So in an attempt to kill many centaurs at one time, Heracles pulled out his secret weapon, an arrow doused in hydra blood. Heracles fired the arrow off toward a charging group of centaurs that were heading for Chiron and the kids. Heracles fired the arrow off toward a charging group of centaurs that were heading for Chiron and a group of young warriors in training. The arrow was drawn with such force that it did indeed kill the centaurs that were attempting to attack Chiron and the kids, but it also struck Chiron in the knee. Because the arrow was bewitched with Hydra blood, and Hydra blood was poisonous to all mortals and immortals, even gods, Chiron's wound would never heal, no matter what kind of treatments he was given. The pain became so intolerable that eventually Chiron begged Zeus to take his life and give his life force to Prometheus. Enter Prometheus. Prometheus was one of the original Titans, so with Kronos and Gaia and that tribe of gods previous to the Olympians. And Prometheus turned his back on the Titans during their war with the Olympians to help the Olympians overcome the Titans. Prometheus was a prominent force in Zeus's takeover of the throne, and in his becoming the king of the gods. Zeus grew to love Prometheus and cherished his friendship and advisement. However, Prometheus began to notice that Zeus was becoming a little drunk with power, you could say, and Zeus's headstrong and biased sense of ruling was not what Prometheus expected nor supported as his kingship began to unfold. It hadn't been too long into their collaboration of the creation of humans when Zeus grew to despise the humans, as their ability to think for themselves developed, leaving their worship of Zeus and the other gods in a state of questioning. But Prometheus was intrigued by this unplanned evolutionary leap that the humans were going through, and thought that the humans should be allowed to exercise a will of free thought, rather than be forced into a belief system created by standards the gods thought to be best. I know this is kind of skipping through things, but Prometheus and Zeus created the human race in ancient Greek mythology, or history, whichever you perceive it to be. So, moving on. Zeus, who was the god of thunder and lightning, in his attempt to regain complete control over the humans, began to use his elemental power of thunderbolts to destroy the world he had built for the humans. When Prometheus saw that Zeus was willing to burn down everything that the two of them had created by bringing the creation of humanity into fruition, Prometheus stole the force of fire from Zeus and gave the gift of fire to humans. Fire was an exclusive elemental power reserved for only the gods because of its ability to enlighten everything around it. So when it was gifted to the humans, it created a whole new paradigm of how life could be lived on Earth plane that the humans had never perceived of before. Zeus was furious with Prometheus, and in his fury, he ripped out Prometheus's liver. Zeus then placed Prometheus on the side of a cliff and damned him with the eternal torture of vultures and eagles feeding on him until he died at night. And then overnight, every single night, Prometheus would be resurrected and the torturous feedings would begin all over again. Brutal. Brutal. I know. But a poignant part to Chiron's story, because when Chiron realized that he could not heal and therefore was himself damned to a life of long, torturous pain, this is when he pleaded with Zeus to replenish Prometheus's life force with his own. Zeus agreed to the sacrifice that Chiron requested, and Prometheus's life force was restored. So, thank you, Prometheus and Chiron. Your sacrifices are oh so appreciated by giving us the enlightenment of fire. P.S. Just a little FYI. The age that all of this took place in ancient history, just happened to be the Can you guess it? The age of Aquarius. So, yeah, we're not going through the first one. Here we are again. With Chiron setting up numerous lessons for us as we become initiates into this age of Aquarius. Aquarius 2.0, one could say. What a coincidence, right? If you believe in those. And as you'll see as I get further into this vloggity, it's really more like the version 3.0. You'll understand why in a bit if you're sticking with me this far and deciding to move forward. And thank you so much if you are. So fast forward to the skies and the above in our current time frame. Chiron's retrograde at the 0 or void point between the house of Taurus, the infant earth sign, and the house of Aries, the infant fire sign, is going to take us into some major introspections about the what and the where we want to create for our collective future. The when is already here. However, for us to truly understand versus understand what that means, we're going to have to take a collective journey of retrospections about the when, where, and what we came from, our history. In this particular void degree of the zodiacal wheel, Chiron sits between the element of fire, which represents creation and conception, and the element of earth, which represents physical manifestation in the material world, aka the facade of control, or what reality is and isn't here on Earth plane. Therefore, we may experience things from our past, and I'm talking about ancient pasts, coming back into our awareness, becoming aware of the ancients. For instance, in a bigger outlook, we might be pushed into a reflection of how and what we were taught about the world around us, how this skewed our vision of growing up in the world, how we were trained into conscious actions and emotional reactions that weren't necessarily our own authentic actions or reactions. And in becoming aware of these things, we may discover what we can do differently to do better for ourselves, for others, and for our Mama Gaia, who is the world around us, to bring equity, peace, harmony, and abundance to all beings and to Mama Gaia herself. Some of these past reflections of the required disciplinary customs we've been trained into come from our parents, but as we move forward, much of the past's veils will be pulled away, like a little tiny man behind a curtain pretending to be the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. When those veils begin to disappear, we will see that most of the disciplines we've been required to become accustomed to came from many generations long before them who were trained into these disciplines, and then trained our, say, great-great-great-grandparents, who then trained our great-great-grandparents, who then trained our great-grandparents, who then trained our grandparents, who then trained our parents, who then trained you, me, us. You see the chains that bind us to our past here, right? Do we really want the future generations to experience the same dictations, disciplines, and deceptions that have been dumped into our psyches? I know it may not seem clear in the case I just presented to you all right now, but clarity is futile, friends, and we will all see the chains we've been held in for far too long. And some of us may even mature enough out of this experience to take responsibility for ourselves when we realize that the chains that have bound us were never really locked. We could have escaped the whole time, but instead chose to be bound by the convenience of outside reliances, and ultimately we sacrificed our ability to be self-reliant. Well, never fear, because Chiron is here. And once again, ancient history is repeating itself. Just as Prometheus liberated the humans by giving them the power and enlightenment of fire, which was a liberation they didn't even know they needed, We are about to be liberated from the current chains of self-imprisonment, my beloved Earthbound fam. Chiron's retrograde and the Earthbound retrospection it's going to induce in us Earthbounders with the fire of enlightenment once again is right on time with the new paradigm of life we've just entered into, the second, or really the third, coming of the age of Aquarius. Maybe if you're still listening to this, you might recognize a couple of phrases that, if you come from a Christian background, sound a bit familiar, like a resurrection of a sacrificed Prometheus in this case, but, Jesus in the Bible, and the second coming of the age of Aquarius, which I'm talking about the age of Aquarius, but in the Bible it talks about a second coming of Christ, correct? Which is the repeat of the first age of Aquarius that Prometheus created by defying Zeus, the king of the gods himself. It's worth noting that the ancient Greek historical timeline that I'm speaking of existed around 2000 BC. It is not a coincidence that we are in a flip side of that history now, in the centurion years of 2000 AD. This is our Mother, Father, God's divine plan in real time. I know that many who are still listening to this may be doubtful about this mythology as history thing, so let me describe this from a more current state of belief systems. The Bible also discusses resurrection and the second coming, right? Is it possible that this exact moment in time is what the Bible is actually referring to? I'll let you decide for yourself, but if the Bible is a chronicle that you follow, please feel free to revisit the books of Ezekiel, Proverbs, John, Luke, and Revelation again. And just notice if you understand them from maybe a different perspective after the stories that I've told and I will be telling here. So the next piece of history or mythology that I have to add to this is the Mesopotamian story of Lilith. Mesopotamian mythology, that's a mouthful, is a history that is even more ancient than the history of ancient Greece, as its induction took place around 4000 BC. Do you see the generational millennia of the 2000-year jumps as I lay out these timelines here? I'm telling you, divine plans, y'all. Divine plans. Okay, so let's chat about Lilith. In astrology, Lilith is known as the Black Moon, or the permanent shadow of Mama Moon. In Mesopotamian mythology, Lilith is the first wife of Adam prior to Eve. Yes, prior to Eve, the first human that was ever created. Turns out that Adam's original partner in the Garden of Eden was Lilith, and she was created at the same time as Adam was, to exist as an equal with Adam. The story goes that they were created and sent to Earthplane to procure the Garden of Eden, and their missions, in their agreement with God, were to bring the energetics of heaven above to Earthplane below. In doing this, they were tasked with preparing Earthplane for the expansion of life, and then expanding life further on Earthplane through populating Earthplane once the preparations for this expansion were complete. Adam and Lilith worked together side by side. They loved each other, and they cared for the land. They learned how to plant, to tend, to nurture, to harvest, to read the cycles and the seasons that Earthplane rotated through, and even learned how to build a mighty organic kingdom out of the organic gifts that Mama Gaia provided. When the time came to move into the population part of the plan, through Adam and Lilith's procreation, Adam's fervent appetite for sexual appeasement became overwhelming and overbearing for Lilith. When she told Adam to basically back off and get off, he refused to respect her wishes. So Lilith decided that this is not the shite she signed up for when she decided to take on this mission. So she went straight to God and told God that this kind of harassment was not what she agreed to, and she wanted out of the agreement. The legend has it that God told Lilith that this was indeed what she had signed up for, and that if she wanted out of the agreement, she could leave the Garden of Eden, but if she did, she could never come back to Eden, and further, that she could never come back to heaven, which left her to roam the outskirty shadows of Earthplane, thus giving Lilith the title of the Dark Moon in the ancient Greek sagas of history. Maybe not, but then again, maybe, just maybe, you've deduced through this story that Mama Moon is Eve. If Mama Moon is Eve, then who does that make Father Son? Again, it's no coincidence that on August 12th, we will have a full solar eclipse where Mama Moon will be in her state of newness or darkness directly on top of Father Sun for the duration of the eclipse. Divine Feminine Rising. Also, Lilith, who has been traveling through the 13th house of the zodiac, the house of Ophiuchus, which is directly in the middle of the houses of Scorpio and Sagittarius, her trek through that has been over the last 18 months. She is now closing out her visit to this hidden realm of our zodiacal wheel. The house of Ophiuchus is a real constellation up in our heavens, and Ophiuchus is nicknamed the Serpent Bearer. In mythology, serpents represent the gaining or rising of wisdom, aka learning. Ophiuchus, which is his Roman name, is Asclepius in ancient Greek history or mythology. Asclepius was the master of medicine and healing, and it is said that he learned his medicinal and healing skills from watching a serpent use herbal remedies to bring another serpent back to life. Asclepius was able to master the skill of healing so succinctly that he gained the ability to resurrect any form of life from a state of death, and did so in spades. In ancient Greek mythology, the story is that this habit of resurrection that Asclepius had threw off the balance of the realms of Earthplane because too many people weren't dying. When Hades, who was Pluto in Roman mythology, complained to Zeus that his realm was being deprived of souls, the imbalance of the realms became apparent to Zeus. He asked Asclepius to halt his resurrections. Asclepius agreed, but his heart couldn't accept the pain that death caused in the hearts of humans. So he kept the resurrections going. Finally, the balance of life between the realms was so chaotic that Zeus felt he had no choice but to kill Asclepius, and he struck him down with a thunderbolt of lightning. However, Asclepius, in his spirit form, was given immortal stature by being placed in the heavens as his own constellation, Ophiuchus, right between Sagittarius, which just happens to be represented by a centaur, and the house of Scorpio, which is the zodiacal representation of the underworld. In esoterica, or hidden teachings, this is known as Ophiuchus's house is known as the initiation by fire, because of the rising wisdom that comes from the depths of death and rising of rebirth. Scorpio is the deep, dark, adult water sign of the zodiac, aka the underworld, and Sagittarius is the elder fire sign of the zodiac. So, initiation by fire. Or you could phrase it, the rising of the spark of wisdom. And as mentioned, the serpent in ancient Greek mythology represented wisdom. FYI, just another coincidence. In many esoteric Bible interpretations, Lilith is said to be the serpent who tempted Eve to bite into the apple of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. The coincidences are just uncanny, aren't they? But wait, there's more. Another coincidence that is taking place in the next few days is that Lilith will complete her initiation through the baptism by fire of Ophiuchus's house on August 10th. Just 2 days, two sides of a coin, before the full solar eclipse comes into fruition. I know, things that make you go, right? When Lilith's wishes for her well-being were threatened by God in taking Adam's side, this left Lilith feeling let down, betrayed, and bewildered, as she was under the impression that she and Adam were equals. In that moment of pure enlightenment as to what her role would be if she stayed in Eden, Lilith told Adam and God that they could both basically go to hell, and she walked out on them, regardless of what losses she might suffer. No loss would have been worse or as severe as the loss of her sovereignty, her dignity, and her integrity, and she refused to sacrifice those traits to appease a destiny that Adam and God procured for her. Lilith decided that she would forge the path of her own destiny, regardless of God's support. And that is exactly what she did. Again, if this story interests you, I urge you to do more research into Lilith's history. You might find some very disturbing words that pertain to her path, but keep in mind that her history is interpreted through perceptions by humans that are not necessarily the truth. After all, history is written by those who win the wars, is it not? The rest is excluded, erased, and turned into tales of illusion, or myths, if you will. Lilith's story and the story of Prometheus, to me, go hand in hand, although they took places in different ancient ages. Prometheus defied the king of the gods, and Lilith defied God himself. Both are stories of refusal to give up their sovereignty, which led to sacrifice, yes, but also led them to liberation because of their refusal to back down or bow down in the faces of authority that their hearts didn't agree with. Both denied the demands of the highest authority figures in order to expand their own ideas of a better way of doing things, rather than shrinking into the commands they were given. This proposes a question to those of us who are here on Earth plane right now as we start to see the effects of the commands we've accepted come into the fires of enlightenment. As these revelational effects come into fruition, into enlightenment, it will be common to second guess ourselves and the reality in which we've participated in for the last 2,000 years. As our senses of life as our sense of life as we know, as we've, let me start that sentence all over again. As our sense of life as we've known it gets shaken and stirred in the unfolding of the new age, we will all have to use our free will and what we've learned so far, aka our wisdom, the wisdom that has risen within us, to implement how well we truly know ourselves and consistently ask ourselves, as the plethora of choices begin to develop, am I okay with who I am becoming by making this choice or this decision? What decision, you're asking? Well, really, that's going to look different for each and every one of us, my beloved Earthbound fam. But what we're willing to sacrifice to become but the question, when I present you with that question, what I'm asking is, what are we willing to sacrifice to become better and to do better, to make the world around us better? This is going to be the choice points of the decisions we'll be facing. The ability to act and respond as our authentic selves is to honor ourselves. In honoring ourselves and our authenticity, we've accomplished and completed the valuable lesson of truly knowing thyself, gaining the wisdom. In conclusion, many of us have heard that Jesus is coming back, right? Especially in these crazy days we got going on right now. But do we know what Jesus will look like this time around? What if the ideas we've held of what a divine masculine figure of Jesus should look like is shattered into 1,000 points of light and rearranged into a divine feminine figure? Right now in the zodiacal wheel, Lilith is in the final minutes of the 25th degree of Sagittarius, who just happens to be ruled by King Jupe, who is Zeus in Greek mythology. This particular degree is also the final degree of the house of Ophiuchus. Lilith's resurrection completes on August 10th. When she hits the 27th degree of Sagittarius, she will complete all of the tests of initiation, and she will be in the renewing state of rebirth, or you could call it a type of second coming. And I'm not saying that it's going to be Lilith that becomes Jesus in the next phase of our existence, friends. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm giving an example to create some pondering on things not looking like we think they will, so we can practice the art of acceptance and allowance as the age of Aquarius unfolds the future we are in the currents of. It is said that Jesus, who we give so much reverence to, and absolutely deserves that reverence, embodied the state of Christ consciousness. That this is what he came here to give us as a gift. Is it possible that this second coming doesn't necessarily look like Jesus, doesn't necessarily look like Lilith, but instead looks like Christ consciousness rising in each and every one of us? The world is not always what it seems, my friends. And history, no matter how old it is, repeats itself because we live on a cyclical planet. The history I've discussed today spreads out over about a 6,000-year timeline. Lilith's history at the 4000 BC mark, Chiron and Prometheus at the 2000 BC mark, the turn of the ages that took place in the 33 years of Jesus's life, which created the difference between the BC and AD timelines to the now AD 21st century that is the 2000 AD mark. Just think of all that will develop over the next 2,000 year span when the 4000 AD mark is alive and well. I mean, we're only 26 years into the unfolding of this next 2,000 year cycle. So what kind of patterns will we create with this? Time will literally tell, won't it? Patterns develop within and through the cycles of change, and the patterns of the veils we've adopted in this shifting cycle from Pisces to Aquarius are being pulled back, revealing thousands and thousands and thousands of years of old paradoxes that aren't relative anymore. But those who are addicted to those patterns may do their damnedest to try to keep them alive. When the fallacies of finances, healthcare, agricultural systems, and even death start to rise to the surface as the age of Aquarius unfolds, those false patterns are going to be rather difficult for many people to let go of. They are going to be forced to tap into the deepest regions of their free will to determine how they will deal with them, or even if they will deal with them. Some will choose not to, and so be it. None of us are going to have the same reactions or responses. So again, please take this time of Chiron's retrograde to go into retrospection about your own free will, how you will yield that innate power through knowing yourself to become better, and then using that to do better and create a better earth plane for ourselves and for the future generations. Chiron will be retrograde until January 26th, 2027. So this is a lot of time we have to reflect, to retrospect. Now, I realize that in this vloggity, many of you may think that my mind is just full of maniacal fantasies. That's okay. Really, it's okay. I'm pretty used to that. Exercise your free will in whatever sort of conclusions you may draw from what I've presented here today. This was so much to try to wrap a head around, right? To try to wrap just one little human mind around. So I totally understand if y'all just need a few or maybe a lot of moments to let this all sink into your skulls. I really appreciate you being here with me if you've made it this far. Bless y'all's hearts, and I mean that from the deepest place within me. But if this vloggity has piqued your interest in ancient history, I truly urge you to look into these stories I've presented today further. When or if you contemplate or research, please keep your hearts ahead of your minds and giving thanks for the unknown blessings that are already on their way. Nothing can stop what's coming in the age of Aquarius, my friends. So we may as well live the life we love the gods we trust, and not take it all too seriously, because whatever plans we may be making right now are for sure valid, but they are just a tiny little aspect of the divine plan that is already underway. Find a purpose in life so big it will challenge every capacity to be at your best. I hope that this vloggity did help educate or at least entertain you. But most of all, I hope that it sparked your consciousness to remember, remember, remember that you are stars, not standards. Now go shine, my beloved earthbound fam, and have yourselves a very joyful day. Blessed be. I love you so much.